The council chamber fell silent as Carolyn stood before the circle of elders, her breathing steady despite the weight of a dozen predatory gazes fixed upon her. The Vakreen were magnificent creatures standing nearly 3 meters tall with obsidian scales that shimmered like oil on water and eyes that burned with ancient intelligence. For 3 cycles she had lived among them, studied their culture and learned their language. Now that knowledge might be the only thing keeping her alive. The human has violated our most sacred law, Elder Morpheus declared, his voice reverberating through the stone chamber like distant thunder. She has entered the forbidden archive and gazed upon secrets meant only for Vakreen eyes. The penalty is clear. Kara's fingers trembled, but she forced herself to meet the elder's gaze. She had known the risks when she'd followed the distress signal into those ancient halls. What she'd found there had changed everything, a truth that the elders desperately wanted to keep buried. The Vakreen weren't the galaxy's apex predators they claimed to be. Their entire civilization had been built on borrowed technology from a species they'd driven to extinction millennia ago. I meant no disrespect, Kara said, her voice carrying across the chamber in flawless Vakreen. I was following a signal, trying to help. Ignorance is no excuse, hissed Elder Cythera, her scales rippling with barely contained aggression. You have seen what cannot be unseen. You must be silenced. The massive doors of the chamber burst open with a thunderous crash. A pack of young Vakreen flooded inside, their scales still bearing the mottled patterns of youth. At their head stood Threx, barely past his second molt, his amber eyes blazing with defiance that should have been impossible for one so young. No, Threx growled, positioning himself between Kara and the elders. You will not harm her. Alpha Korath, the supreme leader of the Vakreen, rose from his obsidian throne. His presence dominated the chamber, centuries of authority radiating from every movement. Threx, stand down. This does not concern the cubs. It concerns all of us, Threx replied, his voice unwavering despite facing the Alpha himself. The other cubs formed a protective semicircle around Kara, their small claws extended, their bodies tensed for conflict. Carolyn saved my clutch sister when she fell into the acid pools. She taught us about the stars and showed us kindness when we were deemed too weak for warrior training. She has earned our loyalty. Kara's heart hammered in her chest. She'd spent months with the young Vakreen, treating them as students rather than specimens. They'd been cast aside by their society, deemed unworthy because they asked too many questions and showed too much curiosity. In them she'd seen a future where Vakreen and humans might truly understand each other. This is treason, Elder Morpheus snarled. Alpha, command them back to the nursery. Alpha Korath's eyes narrowed. His voice, when it came, carried the weight of absolute authority that had never been questioned in living memory. Cubs, return to your dens. This is not your battle. Not a single cub moved. Threx stood taller, his scales beginning to darken with the first hints of true maturity. With respect, Alpha, we refuse. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. In 10,000 years of Vakreen history, no one had ever refused a direct command from the Alpha. The very foundations of their society trembled in that moment. You dare? Alpha Korath's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Carolyn showed us the old texts, Threx said, his words measured and deliberate. The ones in the archive that the elders wanted her silenced for reading. We know the truth now. Our ancestors were not conquerors. They were refugees who stole their way to power. And instead of learning from that shame, the elders choose to repeat it by condemning someone who only sought knowledge. Elder Cythera lunged forward, but 3 cubs intercepted her, their combined weight bringing the massive elder crashing to the floor. It wasn't an attack, merely a statement that they would not be moved. Enough. Alpha Korath's roar shook dust from the ancient stones. But when the echoes faded, the cubs remained unmoved, a living wall between their human friend and the judgment of their elders. For a long moment, the chamber held its breath. Then something unexpected happened. Alpha Korath began to laugh, a deep rumbling sound that started in his chest and filled the space around them. Do you see what has happened here, Morpheus? Cythera? The Alpha gestured at the cubs with something almost like pride. For generations we have bred warriors who follow orders without question. We have crushed curiosity and punished independent thought. And now when it matters most, our young have found their spines. He turned his ancient gaze to Threx. Because a human showed them it was possible to question, to think, to choose their own path. The Alpha descended from his throne and walked slowly toward Kara. The cubs tensed, but Threx held up a hand, trusting in something Kara hoped she understood. Perhaps, Alpha Korath said quietly. Standing before her, the real violation was not you discovering our secrets, but us keeping them in the first place. He turned to address the entire chamber. The cubs have spoken their truth. They will not abandon their friend, even in the face of our authority. This is not weakness. This is evolution. Elder Morpheus opened his mouth to protest, but Alpha Korath silenced him with a glare. Kara Lynn, you are free to go, and free to stay should you choose. The archive is now open to those with the courage to face what it contains. The Alpha looked at Threx with unmistakable respect. Perhaps it is time we learned from the young, and from those brave enough to stand with them. As Kara stood there, surrounded by her unlikely protectors, she realized that she'd witnessed something far more significant than first contact. She'd seen the moment a civilization chose to evolve, guided not by the wisdom of elders, but by the courage of cubs who refused to let fear dictate their choices. Threx met her eyes and gave her a small nod. No words were needed. They had defended each other, and in doing so had changed the future of two species forever.